Welcome to Investing Insights. I'm your host, Ivana Hampton. If you're newly retired or will join the ranks soon, it's time to think about how you plan to spend your nest egg. Morningstar researchers are helping new retirees figure out where to begin. The recently published State of Retirement Income Report concluded that the starting safe withdrawal rate for people beginning their retirement in 2026 is 3.9%. That number might seem low. However, the team has analyzed several strategies to lift it to almost 6%. Morningstar portfolio strategist Amy Arnott has investigated the data and is here to explain flexible withdrawal strategies. It's great to see you, Amy.
Great to see you too.
Now, you and your fellow researchers determined the starting safe withdrawal rate for new retirees is 3.9%. Can you give an overview of what went into that estimate and what it means?
Sure. So we started out by coming up with some return estimates going out over the next 30 years. And then because they're estimates, there are many different things that could happen. So we ran 1,000 different kind of return paths as part of a Monte Carlo simulation. And then we looked for the highest starting safe withdrawal rate that ended up with a positive portfolio balance at the end of the 30-year period, at least 90% of the time. And so what that means is with the 3.9% number, you use that percentage and your starting portfolio balance to come up with your starting withdrawal amount. And then each year as you go through retirement, you adjust that dollar value by inflation.
Now, on the December 5th episode, Margaret Giles and Christine Benz, they talked about the base case estimate of 3.9%. Today, we're going to talk about bumping it up to as high as 5.7%. So Everyone watching, check out your screen for the chart. Everyone listening, click the link in the show notes and check out Spending Methods Summary Graphic in Amy's article. Amy, why do flexible withdrawal strategies allow for higher withdrawal rates?
Well, so if you're using a traditional 4% rule or the 3.9% number that we just talked about, that is assuming that you're taking out the same amount every single year, year after year, it is very conservative. And because you're never changing the amount except for the inflation adjustment, it ends up being very conservative because you're not making any changes if the portfolio value is down or the portfolio value is up. So the flexible strategies that we tested all allow you to withdraw more because you are making course corrections as you go along throughout retirement.
So it's definitely, you have to be engaged.
Right.
No set it and forget it with that. So everyone, Amy will write about flexible withdrawal strategies in the series of articles coming to Morningstar.com. Today's special, she's given us a preview. So thank you for that, Amy. So the base case is 3.9%. That may not be enough for some people. However, they still want a predictable paycheck-like income. Which flexible withdrawal strategy would suit them and how does it work?
So one option would be an approach that we call forego inflation after loss. And as the name suggests, this would involve anytime the portfolio is down in a given year, you would skip the inflation adjustment the next year. So you are making some changes over time, but they're pretty small. And it still allows you to have relatively consistent spending from year to year. And we estimate with that method, you could spend about 4.3% as a starting rate. We also looked at another method that we call actual spending, which is based on some empirical data about how retiree households tend to spend throughout retirement. And what that data tends to show is that people on average spend less as they get older. So we modeled our approach based on that data and looked at what would happen if you cut back your inflation adjusted spending by just a small amount each year, about 2% per year. So again, there is a small adjustment, but it's not a large amount and it's predictable. And we estimate that with that method, you could spend up to 5% as a starting withdrawal rate.
Now, there's a strategy that sort of falls in the middle of the pack. It's not too aggressive, it's not too conservative, and it comes with an initial withdrawal rate just a tick above 5%. How does the so called Vanguard dynamic spending method work?
Yeah, so as you can probably guess, this is something that Vanguard has written about. They've published a couple white papers about this method. And the idea is that you are, as the name suggests, you're setting a floor and ceiling on how much the withdrawal amount can increase or decrease versus the previous year.
Mm.
So in this method, they used 5% as a ceiling and 2.5% as a floor. So if your each year's starting withdrawal amount is above the ceiling, you would cut it back to be at the ceiling number. And if it's below the floor, you would increase it up to the floor. So again, it's a way of making adjustments over time as the portfolio value changes.
Are there any disadvantages to this middle of the road approach?
Yeah, so it does involve some maintenance. You would
Mhm.
have to, you know, make this calculation once a year,
Mm.
and some people may not want to use that type of method if they really would just want to set a number and stick with it.
Got it. So, a lot of folks want to travel, they want to spoil their grandkids and more. If spending while you're alive is more important than leaving a bequest, which flexible withdrawal strategy would work here?
Yeah, so the approach that really excelled in terms of lifetime spending is something that we call probability-based
Hmm.
guardrails, and this is based on something that a retirement software provider called Income Labs uses. And the idea is that each year, as you go throughout retirement, you're retesting your probability of success. So the way we tested this is if your probability of success hit 95% or more, then you give yourself a raise of 10%. And if it drops to 75% or less, you would cut back on your spending. So because you're retesting the probability every year and adjusting for the portfolio value, if it's outside of those bands, that approach we estimate came out with the highest lifetime spending amount.
This could be very exciting. You see that 95% number. Now, the constant percentage and the endowment method allow for the highest starting safe withdrawal rate of 5.7%. New retirees should brace themselves for some bumpiness in that annual spending, right?
Right. So with both of these methods, you are again making adjustments based on each year's portfolio balance. With the constant percentage method, you're taking just a flat percentage and using that percentage um, of the previous year's portfolio balance, that becomes your annual spending amount. The endowment method is similar, but instead of looking at the previous year's balance, it's based on an average of the previous 10 years. So you're trying to smooth out those um, portfolio values a little bit.
If someone prefers the idea of leaving money to their loved ones or to charities after they pass away, which approaches could help them achieve those goals?
Yeah, so the base case that we talked about at
Mhm.
the beginning, where you're keeping spending constant and only making adjustments for inflation, that method came out with the highest ending portfolio value. And the reason for that is it's very conservative and you're not changing, you're not giving yourself any raises if the portfolio does well. So we estimate that with that method, if you're starting with $1 million portfolio, you could end up with something like $1.4 million, which is a nice amount for a bequest or gift to charity.
Yeah.
The actual spending method, where you're making small reductions in spending from year to year, is another method that did really well based on the ending portfolio value. And then forego inflation adjustment, where you are looking at the ending portfolio value each year, and if it's down, you're just skipping the inflation adjustment. That method also did pretty well in terms of the ending portfolio value.
Those are some impressive numbers. So, how important is portfolio diversification when using flexible withdrawal strategies?
It is pretty important to have a balance between equity exposure and fixed income exposure. And the reason for that is fixed income can be a really nice buffer against volatility. So if you're kind of putting the brakes on portfolio volatility, that decreases the odds that you're going to run out of money and allows for a higher safe withdrawal rate. But one thing I would note is we based all of these estimates on a 90% probability of success, which is pretty high. So if you're comfortable with a lower probability of success, understanding that you might need to make some adjustments over time, you could have somewhat higher equity exposure and still end up doing pretty well.
I think we should stick with the 90%. So what's the takeaway for the class of 2026 retirees who are figuring out this next phase?
I would point to two things. One is that this whole topic is very complicated. You know, the paper that we published about this is about 50 pages long. So there's a lot of detail. And a lot of people who are thinking about retiring, I think, kind of get overwhelmed and, going through spreadsheets and online calculators, figuring out how much can I spend without running out of money, but, still being able to enjoy retirement. So the numbers are important, but I think some of the qualitative factors are equally important. So figuring out what's really important to you. Do you want to prioritize having a bequest to give to your family members or charity, or would you rather spend more during your lifetime? Are you comfortable with a more complicated method, or do you really want to just keep spending the same year after year? So thinking about what's most important to you can help you decide which method makes sense for you. And another point I would make is this is a time when, because this whole topic is so complicated and the stakes are pretty high, this can be a really good time to get some good quality financial advice. So even if you don't want to work with an AUM-based planner where you're paying a fee every year, it can be helpful to find a qualified planner. You definitely want someone with a CFP that you can work with, even if it's just using a flat fee where they're doing kind of a one-time analysis of your retirement situation, or an hourly fee. And if you have a really good qualified planner, that person can help you kind of stress test your retirement spending and also talk through some of the qualitative aspects that I mentioned about what's really important to you during retirement.
Those are great takeaways. Amy, thank you for coming to the table and explaining how new retirees can spend more if they want to.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Investing Insights is starting a new personal finance series that will help you organize your financial life throughout this year. Morningstar's senior editor, Margaret Giles, and Morningstar's director of personal finance, Christine Benz, will break down those meaty tasks into digestible bites each month. And they're already helping folks on their checklist in this video found on Morningstar.com. 4 financial to-dos to kick off the new year. Check it out.
I'm Margaret Giles from Morningstar. Every year, Morningstar Director of Personal Finance and Retirement Planning, Christine Benz, puts together a financial to-do list for the new year. She's joining me to discuss some of the financial jobs you should consider ticking off early in 2026. Christine, thanks for being here.
Margaret, it's great to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. All right. So first on your list is to revisit how much you're saving because the contribution limits get adjusted year to year. So what should people know?
Right. So for 2026, if you're contributing to an IRA, the contribution limit is going up to $7,500. If you're under age 50, $8,600. If you are over 50, so you get a nice catch-up contribution that is also inflation adjusted. The backdoor Roth is also alive and well. So this opportunity for high income earners to make a contribution to a traditional non-deductible IRA and then convert it to a Roth. So high income savers should consider that. They shouldn't assume that they are shut out of Roth contributions. Then if you're contributing to a company retirement plan, you can also make higher contributions in 2026. So these figures don't exactly trip off the tongue, but if you are under age 50, you get to contribute $24,500 in 2026. If you're over 50, it's $32,500. And then there's this special zone for people who are between the ages of 60 and 63. They can contribute $35,750 in 2026. So there's a special super catch-up contribution for people at that life stage. So high-income people should definitely target these maximum allowable contributions to these tax-sheltered accounts. I also want to note, Margaret, there are some new rules related to catch-up contributions within 401k plans for higher income people. So the new rule is that if your income is above certain thresholds, your contributions, your catch-up contributions have to go up into Roth accounts. So people should have that on their radars. Most plans have added the ability to contribute to Roths, but check with your employer and see what they're doing to make sure that you're in compliance with those new rules about those catch-up contributions.
Right, that's helpful to keep in mind. So for people who are already retired, you think a worthwhile practice is to check up on spending from the year that just ended. So what should retirees be looking for?
Right, it's a good opportunity to check up on your budget in the year past to see where you spent your money and how much you spent of your portfolio. Every year, our team has been putting out this research around safe portfolio spending rates. So if the idea is that you want your portfolio to last over your whole retirement time horizon, how much you can reasonably spend. When we revisited the research in 2025, incorporating some forward-looking forecasts from a team within Morningstar Investment Management, we came out with 3.9% as a safe starting withdrawal for people who have an approximately 30-year time horizon. But my hope is that people don't just take that 3.9 or 4% and run with it, because in many scenarios that will lead to significant underspending and really depriving themselves of a better quality of life that they could otherwise have if they were willing to investigate some of the other spending systems that we look at in the paper. So Amy Arnott, one of the co-authors of the paper, explores a variety of dynamic spending systems that more or less tether spending to what has gone on in the portfolio over the past year. And she found that people with a 30-year horizon can spend closer to like 6% if they're willing to make significant adjustments in their spending based on how their portfolios have behaved. So I would urge people to check out some of those flexible spending strategies. I think they're better than that very sort of flatline base case scenario that we use. And then I would also say that for people who are older and further into their retirement, so maybe you're 75 or 80 and you're well into your retirement, well, guess what? You can spend more. By all means, you shouldn't anchor on the 4% guideline because your time horizon has reduced accordingly. So in our research, we found that people with, say, 15-year time horizons could spend closer to 7% per year. So check that out and bear in mind the implications of time horizon, because I think that's an important consideration here. You get to spend more if you're a bit older.
Absolutely. So we're moving into tax season, and you think another job to tackle is revisiting your approach to itemized deduction. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think many of us had gotten complacent because the standard deduction was better for us than itemizing our deductions. But one new wrinkle that came into effect with this OBA tax-related legislation that was passed in mid-year 2025 was that the cap that had previously prevailed related to the state and local tax that we could deduct. It had been $10,000 for several years. It was increased to $40,000, and that's going to make it more attractive for many taxpayers to itemize rather than take the standard deduction. And that's especially true if you live in a highly taxed state, especially if you're in a high property tax state. You may want to see whether itemizing your deductions makes more sense for you. And of course, that brings on a whole new ballgame of paperwork that maybe you had sort of let lay fallow. But if you've been making charitable contributions, for example, and taking the standard deduction, you hadn't really gotten any tax credit. Well, if you're itemizing, you may be able to. So check that out. Consider saving your receipts and doing a little bit more documentation on charitable giving, especially than perhaps you had done in the past.
Yeah, that's helpful to keep in mind, especially Chicago and Illinois.
Exactly.
I feel like.
New York, New Jersey,
Yes.
California as well.
Yes, absolutely. So to wrap up here, you think that tax season is also a great time to check up on your portfolio's tax efficiency. So what should people be looking out for?
Right. In the coming months, people will be getting their 1099s if they have taxable holdings and they've made income or capital gains distributions. Pay attention to the numbers on those forms that are coming in and see whether you are taking advantage of tax efficient asset locations. So do you have the right investment types siloed in the right account types? With income distributions higher, with interest rates generally higher than they were several years ago, many people have more meaningful income distributions, especially from fixed income and cash holdings that are taxed at their ordinary income tax rate. Ideally, you would have those holdings siloed within your tax sheltered account types. If you're a high income person, perhaps municipal securities, both a municipal money market and municipal bond funds might make more sense if you want to hold fixed income or cash within those accounts. And then if you have holdings in your portfolio that have been generating significant capital gains from year to year, think about siloing them to the extent that you want to hold them within your tax sheltered accounts. With your taxable accounts, the focus should be, if you're making new contributions, focus on those tax efficient broad market index funds and exchange traded funds, which will tend to do a really good job of limiting those capital gains distributions from year to year.
All right. Well, these are helpful to-dos to kick off the start of the year. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks so much, Margaret.
Thanks, Margaret and Christine. Margaret will host Investing Insights on February 6th and talk with Christine about how to use your IRA to optimize your portfolio following 2025's market performance. Keep that date in mind, folks. Thanks for making this show part of your day. I also want to thank senior video producer Jake Van Kersen and associate multimedia editor Jessica Bevel. I'm Ivana Hampton, lead multimedia editor Morningstar. Take care.